Some people are more just straight on the kind of ascension path. It's just all about meditation and they're just in the upper chakras. Others are just in like the sexual practices, whereas I've always been so drawn to both.
This is Awakened Love, the podcast, and I'm your host, Angel. This is a space where we get real about sex, love, and awakening. So strap in, let's go deep. What's up, beautiful awakened beings? Welcome to another episode of Awakened Love. Today I have with me Nadine Lee, who is the founder of Tantric Alchemy, the author of international best-selling Sex Priestess, and a devoted practitioner and teacher of the Tantric arts and feminine embodiment. What's up, Queen? Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So we were just figuring out and realizing that we're both Aussies. And so I want to kind of dive in with a question around that. How do you feel growing up in Australia has impacted you, and how much of that stays with you culturally? Like, do you feel Australian? Do you not feel Australian? Like, what part of that culture has stayed with you?
I love that. Yeah, I love I love meeting other Australians because I've been out of the country for so long, and yeah, it just reminds me of home. You know, it'll always be my home where I was born. But I felt growing up there actually really out of place. I just felt that I couldn't wait to, finish school, finish my university and just get out of there. Like, I felt as though, not like I was running away, like I didn't leave Australia on bad terms. Like, I love the land, I love my family, I love everyone there, but I felt like the culture and the frequency of that land and the consciousness was kind of like limiting me, like I felt like I couldn't expand into my fullest expression there. And, when I left, I think it was about 7 years ago now, I moved to Bali first and based there for like 4 years. And that was when, everything just kind of expanded in my business, in my relationships, in my expression. And now I go back to Australia, and just whenever I go back, I often just go back to visit my family, but also I do love sharing a lot of my gifts there, and it really, uplifts and like inspires and like, I think that's part of the hero's journey is like, when you leave home, you get wisdom and then you take back that wisdom back to your hometown, and that's kind of the point of it. So I like sharing, back in Australia, but I don't necessarily feel me living there is really supportive of what I want to create in this life. So, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I so hear that, sister. I think it's like that sacred pilgrimage, right? I love that. And then there's a sacred homecoming, and I'm sure many people listening can resonate with either having left their hometown, whether it's for just a trip or whether it's for a really extended period. But I love that. It's part of the hero's journey. What would you say, like speaking of the quality of consciousness, what would you say are the gifts of the consciousness held in that land in Australia? And what would you say are the shadows?
I feel one of the biggest gifts, and I don't know if you get reflected this by a lot of Americans, is that we are just so down to earth and so direct and kind of to the point. It's not like fluffing around the issue. It's like we just say what we feel, and it's very direct. And it can be intimidating to a lot of people, especially in some cultures that are kind of a bit more reserved. But I think that's one of the blessings of that culture, because there is this directness, and it's very transparent, so I really appreciate that aspect of the culture. But I also feel one of the shadows maybe was I'm sure you know about like the tall poppy syndrome thing. Like that was one of the biggest things I felt in Australia was, it's like everyone's trying to cut each other down. And then when I went to America, it's the opposite. It's like everyone wants to lift everyone else up. And it's like this kind of like idolization culture, whereas Australia is like suppression culture, and it's like, oh, who are you to get out of your box, and so that's kind of, I feel, one of the shadows there. And I don't know if it's something to do with, because apparently the solar plex of the planet is in Uluru. Did you know that?
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, so maybe it's something about like the power, like power center and like the shadow of power like is being alchemized there. Who knows?
I love that. Powerful. I was just talking about Uluru like 2 days ago. I think I'm being called there.
Wow.
Yeah, I love that. I really agree with both those things that you shared. And I think that is one of the gifts of American culture. As you said, it's like everyone very, very much celebrates success. And there are definitely shadows to that as well. And yes, to the directness, my husband is British and he has definitely helped me refine that energy. It was more like an electric fence before. And now it's a little bit more of that like air of I will be treated sacredly versus like,
yeah.
So I feel that. So you said you left Australia after university. I would love you to share whatever feels true for you. Obviously, your story could take a lifetime to tell, and that's what we're here to do, right? Is tell our story with as much heart and courage as possible. But whatever feels relevant in this moment of who you are, so that our listeners can get to know a little bit about you and the work that you do in the world and the journey that you've gone on to get there.
Yeah, so I actually didn't leave straight after university. There was like a period of, finding the courage and like, all the things that it takes to uproot your whole existence. So I finished, well, I'll just share by what I actually do now and then kind of rewind. So now I help women and men actually, but more so women, really activate their erotic energy and channel that into their creative expression and their highest alignment, their highest dharma in this lifetime. And so I kind of came onto this path because I had the opposite of sexual liberation. As a young child, I had experienced sexual trauma, sexual abuse at a really young age. And, that manifested in all sorts of disconnections, disassociations with my body, promiscuity, like really like going hypersexual, then like shutting down sexual, just really distorted sexuality. And but the main thing I experienced up until I found this path was disassociation. I was not in my body at all. And so it was very hard to distinguish what was a yes, what was a no, and being in my power and trusting my intuition. So I felt very disconnected, so it wasn't until my early 20s I found yoga and meditation. That was the first point, and started to feel this sense of connection again. And I was like, holy shit, I need to explore this, because at the same time I was also really deep in depression and was on, antidepressants and did the traditional psychiatric route and all this, but none of that was helping me, and then I found yoga and meditation and I finally felt like this sense of connection again and like happiness, like true happiness again. And it wasn't long after I found that all these teachers of sacred sexuality, Tantra, body workers were all just flooding into my life. And I started to date a Tantra teacher, and that just opened up my world. And that was really my intro into starting to heal my sexual trauma and starting to feel safe in my body. And so I was just on a path of healing, really. And I also knew that the path that I was prescribed, like I did university, I studied marketing, I was working for Cosmopolitan actually in Sydney and and media agencies. I just knew that wasn't my full path. I knew I was meant to work in holistic healing, and I was interested in nutrition and psychology and all these things, but I really wanted to do that, but I just felt like I had to do what society prescribed. So it wasn't long after I did that for a couple of years, and then I got out and started my path, and I was healing myself, and then I started studying nutrition, studied yoga, and then I kind of just got on this path, and it was all just no looking back from there. But yeah, it was really just about me healing myself first. I didn't intend to teach this, really. Like, I knew I wanted to work in this realm, but I thought it was more going to be like nutrition and naturopathy. I was actually like freaked out by a lot of the, like too deep in the spiritual world. And I actually resisted this path of teaching it for so long. I was like, no, I also knew I needed to heal myself and like do my own deep work. But then it just kind of unfolded, that now it's time to help other women also with this.
Yes. Yeah. I feel like the path chooses you sometimes,
Yeah.
It's so interesting hearing. We have so many similar touch points in our stories. Like we were just sharing, we're both from Queensland, the same state. I left Australia at 18, come from a history of sexual trauma. Started as a yoga teacher, found my path through yoga. Yoga was also my gateway drug.
Yeah.
So it's beautiful to hear the similarities. And I'm curious, I know that you are a practitioner of Tantra and you're speaking of your like devotion to awakening that erotic energy. And it's a word that's used a lot in many different contexts. And I'm curious, what does Tantra mean to you as it pertains to your work?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I was out at a party last night and someone asked me, what is Tantra? And I was like, look, like I've lived in ashrams for years and like studied this, and there's still no definition. And even in the ashrams, they were like, everyone was like, yeah, but can you give us a definition? We just want to write down a definition. And they're like, there's no definition. So, and I think that's part of it. It's like, Tantra to me is actually finding your own truth and your own way of being and how you relate to the world and how you want to show up in this world. So the tools that are given through, some of the practices like the tantric yoga, the sexual practices, the alchemy practices, the purification practices, all of this is really tools, tantric tools that clear your channels so you can just figure out your truth. And then I feel that's Tantra to me.
Yes. Yeah, I love that definition. I think it's a path of illumination, right? And there are many paths of illumination or like seeking, right? Truth seeking. I love that definition of satsang. You can use it as community, or it can also be a group of truth seekers and like sincere spiritual seekers. And so, yeah, I love that idea that it's this way to clear the channel to experience truth. And there are so many different ways to do that. And Tantra is just one of them. What drew you to Tantra? Like why this path of illumination when there are so many?
Yeah, I think it was just like this deep curiosity, always like when I would hear the word, I'm like, I just felt this like draw to it. I had no idea what it meant, but I just felt drawn to it. And I think also just looking back at, from the start, really being so attuned to both my sexual energy and the spiritual energy, like when I was as young as 5 years old, I was like running erotic energy through my body, self-pleasuring and like obsessed with like understanding this frequency of sexual energy, and also like super connected to like fascinated with God and like wanting to understand like these esoteric things. And so Tantra to me also is the merging of sex and spirit. So it's like, I just feel I've always felt this connection to both those worlds. Some people are more just straight on the kind of ascension path. It's just all about meditation and they're just in the upper chakras. Others are just in like the sexual practices, whereas I've always been so drawn to both. And this path has been a path that helps embrace all of it, not cut one or the other. It's like it's all about, from your root to your crown, your animal to your divine. And that resonates with me because it's a holistic, wholesome, integrated path, not cutting out one like part of our psyche.
Yes. Well, our listeners will be like, yes, this is familiar. We love this. That you're speaking to the right community, I think. This is right up our alley.
Nice.
So you bravely shared that you experienced sexual trauma and abuse. I'm curious if it feels aligned to share. Do you remember a pivotal moment in your healing, or a certain practice, a teacher, an experience where you could really, just it felt pivotal to you in the healing process for that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was really that relationship that I shared. It was with a Tantra teacher. So he wasn't like my teacher when we were dating, but obviously he did this as his profession. So we explored a lot of things, like actually reliving the trauma and actually consciously kind of going into it again to feel it in my body in a safe container of like a relationship and with a practitioner who knew what he was doing. That was like really, really scary and also liberating at the same time. And even for me to express, you know, the no and like the anger and the rage that I couldn't as a child. And this is like, this is the work that I do now with clients, obviously not getting sexual with them, but, you know, reliving the original trauma and like giving yourself a voice. So to do it in a way where you're actually reliving a sexual act and like role playing in that was really powerful.
Yes. Yeah, it's so profound. And I think for a lot of women, what I notice is that there can be some confusion of eroticizing certain aspects inherently already in fantasy and things like that, maybe not necessarily to do with the original trauma, but certain themes, let's say, and then feeling very confused. But actually what I'm hearing you express and what I know to be true is that we can, through this erotic landscape and safety and a container with the intention of healing and reclamation, eroticize some of these themes and reclaim power from them through that pleasure. It's such powerful work. I'm so grateful that you're carrying some of that in this world. And thank you for sharing. I know it takes a lot of courage to share about this stuff, so I really appreciate that. It's beautiful to hear you sharing about this relationship that you had that was a really supportive opening into this world. I'm curious, have you ever had, because this is like, it can be a tricky space, as I'm sure you know, and I feel really the depth of the safety in your system and the sincerity in you, which is so beautiful and I'm so grateful for. I've also experienced, and I'm sure you have encountered too in this realm, there can also be some manipulation and some teachers that for me I have experienced as less safe. And I'm curious, have you ever experienced that with teachers in this space, and how did you navigate that? And for people listening, like, how do they navigate that?
Yeah, this is one of the biggest things in this space, because it's like you're seeking healing for sexual, you know, traumas, but then, you know, you're going to this professional that you feel you're meant to trust, and then they end up crossing your boundary and re-traumatizing you. You know, this is, I mean, it's rampant, you know, and even this is just across the board, even with a lot of non-sexual teachers, just gurus in general. They're all just like, you know,
medicine work.
Yeah. So this is a huge shadow. And I actually feel that it is, it's the sexual shadow, you know, and like when you start to accumulate that power of like spiritual power, if you haven't really addressed your sexual shadow, this is what happens. And, I mean, part of the reason why I mainly work with women now is because of this. And actually, so women who have experienced trauma, they don't have to go to a man to heal this. They can actually use things like the jade egg, for example, is a huge tool that I use for sexual healing and clearing trauma. Conscious like self-pleasure, like yoni de-armoring with a yoni wand. So it's like I'll guide women into doing this for themselves. I'm just guiding the practice, but I'm not like touching them or like interfering in their world. And that's like a huge inspiration and drive for why I do what I do, because I did see so much of this and, you know, experienced a lot of, creepy kind of like energies. And I'm just like, I would never go and like get a yoni massage or have a healing session with someone like you. You know, it's just, you can feel that. But again, I didn't feel that fully when I was at the start of the journey, you know, because I was, as I said, disassociated, not in my body. And that's a symptom of like sexual trauma. If you're out of your body, it's very hard to discern like who's safe and who's not. So it's kind of,
yes,
it's a tricky one, you know?
Yeah. And there are actually studies on that show that survivors of sexual trauma, because of exactly what you're describing, can be more susceptible to that in the future.
Yeah.
And so I think it's so beautiful, exactly what you're describing. And I always say to clients, if there is a teacher who you really admire, that's awesome, but are their teachings guiding you back into relationship consistently with your own power? Or is the pedestal just growing taller and higher? And if so, and it may or may not be how they're teaching. It could just be how you're relating to those teachings and who's the right dynamic and teacher for you in that moment. Some people are manipulating and there is, you know, like this abuse of power, and other people are just not the right type of teacher for you because you're unable to use those teachings to go deeper into yourself. And yeah, I think it's such a good point. Like, and I also facilitate those guided practices. And I think it's so beautiful to let women go on that journey while being held and while being safe and while being guided, but to reclaim it for themselves and to do that work, with their own hands and their own reclamation. And I think any of these portals of power, like medicine work, sacred sexuality, spirituality, like where there is great power, there is great shadow. And for anyone listening, I think they might remember I had a conversation with Andrew DeCombe, and we were talking about Ken Wilber's philosophy around waking up and growing up. And if you just wake up and develop your spiritual power, but you don't also grow up alongside that and deal with your shadows and your relational issues, then you're not going to be a very integrated human being. And you even if you have a lot of spiritual power, and it's interesting to look at a lot of the gurus that have all this spiritual power, but it's like, how are their relationships? Like, how are their like day-to-day interactions? Like, how grounded are they in this reality? And if you're not looking to be a guru yourself, and you actually want to have relationship and maybe marriage, maybe children, maybe run a business where you have to manage people or whatever it is, and that guru is not doing any of those things, it's like, how applicable are their skills to your daily life? Is relational work some of what you do, like speaking to that? And if so, can you speak a little to like, what are some of the biggest or most frequent blocks that you see to intimacy? Like, what's blocking most of us from being able to be proficient, functional at being close?
Yeah, so it's interesting because you talk about that, like it's like the spiritual bypassing. So yeah, that's what I realized at one point. You know, I was super tapped into these higher realms, and as I said, I've been in touch with the sexuality piece as well, but it was the relational piece that I realized, holy fuck, like none of this matters. Like when you're relating, like chanting to Hare Krishna is not going to get you anywhere when you're like, you know, like trying to like have a relationship with someone. Like, I mean, it can help that devotion piece, but you know, I was, and a lot of people were use it as a way to escape reality and discomfort. And so for me, like my Tantra that I practice and that I teach and what I've been on my own journey has really been, so it's the relationship to the divine, to self and to other. But to relate to others, I feel, you know, we have to have that relationship to self first. And I have really found, you know, working with the inner child essential, you know, in order to actually work with this sexual energy and, you know, navigate relationships. It's like that has been such a core of my work and a core of a lot of my clients' work, really. You know, they think it's going to be all these like transcendental orgasms. I'm like, yeah, but you're not going to feel that unless you feel safe in your body, in your inner child first. And such a big piece. And so, for me, you know, I'm still navigating that. You know, I still have major intimacy blocks and attracted to unavailable men.
Same girl.
Yeah.
like, it's the work. I'm 6 years into a marriage, and it's like some pockets you're like, this is amazing, it's so easy, and then you hit pockets and you're like, holy shit, like, whoa.
Yeah.
And I don't know, and I'm curious what you think. Like, I don't think it ever ends. I think our soul wants this like juicy, messy process.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's just having the awareness and the tools to navigate it. And I mean, the biggest thing for me was, the abandonment wound, and not like going into like spewing my emotions on others. And so that's been my work, really, is emotional alchemy, like emotional transmutation. Like men do the sexual transmutation of like sublimating their semen, and I feel for a lot of us women, it's like actually sublimating our emotions and moving our emotions through our body instead of spewing it onto others.
Yes. Oh my God, I love that so much. Emotional sublimation. And just for people listening, sublimation, moving energy from top up, like cycling through.
Yeah.
Am I defining that correctly?
Yeah, like, just from the bottom up.
Up, so sublimate, and then desublimation would be moving down. Just for those listening, you're like, what does it mean to sublimate energy? I love that, where like this emotional alchemy that you're describing, and that ability to process the emotions versus act them out or act them in. You touched on the abandonment wound, and I feel like so many people listening have got to be saying, hell yeah, I've got a big dose of that. So if someone is nodding their head going, oh my God, well, first part of the question, how might you know if you have abandonment wounding? Let's start there. Like, what could be some of the signs that you have some serious abandonment wounding?
Well, I think it manifests, in like the attachment styles. Usually, there's the anxious, the avoidant, and the secure. Most people are anxious or avoidant. So anxious is usually when you're scared that the person's going to leave you. So you're kind of like always on edge, and you're like, just grasping at them. There's that kind of, whereas avoidant is more kind of cold and playing it cool. You can so I think if you have that kind of tendency to be a bit more anxious, there's usually underneath that a fear of abandonment, a fear this person's going to leave you. But essentially what it comes to is you abandoning yourself, and this is what I've had to go into with my journey with it. It's like growing up with the conditioning around, having to abandon myself in order to fit into a family dynamic or gain love and approval from my caregivers. I had to hide parts of myself, distort myself, and change to like be someone for my family to love me. And that's essentially self-abandonment. So, once you clear that, like, and work with that, then it kind of lessens on the outside, attracting people who are going to probably abandon you, because if you haven't done that work, you're going to attract people who are like candidates to do the runners,
So true. Yeah, I love that. It's like the self-abandonment piece. And what's interesting too, like, even if you're avoidant, because my husband we presented as avoidant, and I would say we've earned secure attachment through our relationship to each other. And it doesn't necessarily mean that either of us is still not, was more on the anxious side, him more on the avoidant. Doesn't mean that we don't actually present that way in other dynamics, which is interesting as well. Yeah. Like, you can earn your way into secure attachment in one dynamic. Doesn't mean you have that in all dynamics. Found that out the hard way, which is interesting. But his avoidance, at the core of that, was actually a really deep abandonment wound that he had to move through as well. And so it's like, what I'm hearing you say is like, we have to work through this self-abandonment. But it's interesting to see that like self-abandoning can be also playing it cool, and like, I don't have any needs, and like, it's whatever. And that self-abandoning to try and be like, play it cool enough, or keep you just far away enough so that you don't abandon me first, I'm going to abandon you first. It's like, it's so deep. I honestly think that this like fear of disconnection, essentially, right, is so at the root of I feel like we all have a bit of the quote unquote abandonment wound. Abandonment wound is like a flavor of the wound of disconnection, of like the wound of separation. We come out of the womb, we come out as a spark of God consciousness, we're in oneness, and then we're like chilling in the womb, there's still a level of connection, and then you're like ripped into reality, squeezed through a birth canal, or maybe like cut open or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's this trauma of like, holy fuck, I'm separate. What do I have to do to reconnect? And I loved what you were saying about like, what are the parts of me that I have to like put away or distort or control? And I think everybody listening can relate to like these parts of themselves that they've had to leave behind or disconnect from in order to try and be worthy of that reconnection. And I know you work with intimacy as well as sexuality. And so that process of reconnection, like these parts you were saying in yourself that you recognize in your family, they had to go away. Like what was most pivotal and important for you in finding reconnection to those parts?
Yeah, I love this work. It's the shadow work. I like to see it as, these exiled parts of us, the parts of us that we were expressing naturally, like as a child, different archetypes, different characteristics. And, someone may have made a comment like, don't do that, or, girls aren't bossy or whatever, like, or boys don't cry, like whatever it is. And then you feel, okay, like this is not right for me to express this part of myself. So boom, that part of you gets shoved away in the unconscious. And so really the work is like looking at all those parts of us, like different archetypes and characteristics that were shoved to the side into the attic, into the unconscious, and really giving them an expression now as an adult. And that's why I love archetypal work. And the big one that I notice when I work with these archetypes, with women especially, is like the dark feminine, the seductress, more like the sexuality as opposed to like sensuality. It's like the part of us that like knows our boundaries, like the bossy part of us, like all these like more intense, like, Kali kind of qualities, it's not all the soft feminine, like there's that part of us like that as women has been so suppressed, not just from our parents, like this is deep, like from the Catholic Church, from just society in general, it's such deep programming, all the religions, like any sign of feminine sexuality, feminine voice, is seen as, oh, no, put her aside, throw her out of the Garden of Eden, burn her on a stake. It's like such a deep thing. So this is a big one for a lot of us women to reclaim.
Oof.
Yeah.
Yes, the dark goddess. Yeah, it's like that generative, because you think of like the mother is like the part that's like allowed, quote unquote, like generative, creative, sustaining. And it's like, but in order to get to that creative sustenance, we have to also destroy and burn and become ash and winter. And so I love that, and that you bring forward this idea of the dark feminine. And so I know you work with masculine and feminine dynamics as well as part of your work. And what I'm hearing you say that I'm like, yes, is one, I'm hearing you talk about how we, if you say boys don't cry or girls don't shout, as you were saying, or some version of that, and then we're like, oh God, and we distort those parts. What I see, and I'm curious if you see this as well, is like in the bubblegum spirituality of Instagram, which bless it, like I'm like, put it on a fucking bumper sticker, because if we get into it for the wrong reason, quote unquote, wrong reason, is there one? We might bump into the right reason. Or if we're not quite at a state of consciousness that allows us to truly facilitate with dignity and sincerity, then through the exploration, like such as life, hopefully people will fall into that. But something that I see that's harmful is people are not getting what you just expressed, how you just expressed. There is this like gender roles that distorts people's relationship to themselves. And there is this suppression, especially on the bubblegum spirituality of Instagram, of the dark feminine. And it's like, you have to be soft and receptive all the time. If you've got to be in your quote unquote feminine, like what the fuck does that actually even mean? And so how do you, because I can feel like based on everything that you just said, that you have this understanding of that and those issues when it comes to the difference between like femininity, masculinity in a sacred sense versus like toxic gender roles. And like, do you see that problem as well in this work and in this field? And how do you remedy that when you're doing this work with masculine and feminine dynamics?
Yeah, I mean, I've just Yeah, I mean, I can see where things like polarity practices, they can be helpful for like igniting sexual attraction. It's just natural
Yes.
law how like two opposites attract. But that's just one
Yes.
aspect of the equation, because it's like, okay, cool. Now you've activated sexual energy. Now what? Like, you've got to be able to work with that energy. It's like, otherwise you're just fuck buddies, or you're just like lovers. You're not actually in a relationship. So I think that's a big
Yes.
piece that's missing in a lot of these teachings. And I think there's there is a shadow to this whole, you see a lot of men talking about like how women should just automatically surrender because they're a woman and he's a man. So, and it's just like, that's just so like 1940s on steroids coming back. It's like, no, buddy, like, no. You earn that like surrender, and, it's not just by default because you're a man that a woman's going to surrender and submit to you. So
yes, so true. Like, we have to create the container for surrender, man or woman.
Yeah.
Like, whomever in that space is getting to have and give the gift of their surrender, man or woman. And I mean, it's such a beautiful experience, whatever gender you are and like whatever configuration you're in. We have to create or have created for us the right conditions, as you're saying. Like, when you say that they've got to earn it, it's like, yeah, there are conditions to surrender, to do that safely. I love this. More. Yes.
Yeah, for sure. And also, the thing that I really don't agree with a lot of these is, well, I actually have found some teachers that I really resonate with. I think they're in LA. You're in LA, yeah? Oh, no, you're in Colorado. It's
in Colorado now, yeah.
Yeah, it's Justin in London. They're Justin Pierce.
Oh my God, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, this is so crazy that you're bringing this up right now, because they both have their middle names are me and my husband's first names, which is so weird.
Wow.
Right? London Angel Winters, Justin Patrick Pierce. And I just signed up, so I haven't started yet, to their like monthly couples training.
Okay.
To have a practice to get my partner, because I had a solo tantric practice, and I've sort of looped my partner in, of course, like by osmosis, and we've done stuff, but I really want him to like be in the practice now, and he's ready to do that with me. So we literally just signed up for because I also feel, I was like, these guys are the real fucking deal, and it's hard to find, isn't it?
Yeah. Because the thing that resonated for me about their teachings is that, so yeah, the woman, usually is more in the feminine, and then the masculine's usually more in the masculine. But it's not discounting that as a woman, I still have a masculine side, a yang side, and the man still has a feminine side. And it might not be as prevalent in your relation, but it's not excluding and exiling these parts, because, I was in a relationship a couple of years ago, and this guy I was with was really into polarity, and it was almost like I felt shamed like by him for showing any sign of masculine traits. He was like, oh, you're working too much. You're too driven. You're too focused on your mission. And I was like, whoa, like I'm probably one of the most feminine women. Like it's what a lot of people come to me expressing. And I get that. And he's like, yeah, like, but it was like almost like his masculine was intimidated by my masculine side. And I don't want to feel that. Like I want to feel, we can dance between, like, if I'm in a masculine energy one moment, he can polarize into feminine, and then he can go there. It's the dance. And
we don't always have to be polarized, right?
Well, that's the thing. Yeah.
Like we want, as you were saying, like it was so beautiful. You're like, yeah, polarity is good to spark sexual attraction. And it's like, yes, it is, and one type of sex for sure, because I'm bisexual and I love to make love in many different configurations. And one of my favorite ways to make love is like femme to femme, like mirror to mirror, like softness to softness. And it's so beautiful, so there's that. And like, I think that what gets lost in what I'm hearing you say in that story is like, there's this idea that through these polarity teachings that we always have to be polarized with our partner. And like, the longer you're with someone, the more energetically similar you become, because you become teammates, and there's a lot of energy of harmony and collaboration. And I think then we have to learn how to be able to shift into polarity when we want to shift into polarity. And like, I feel you're a fucking alpha female. I'm an alpha female.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing. We're leaders. We're business owners. Like, I look at that in you and I admire that in you, and I feel your receptivity and I feel that in your system. And like, that's whom I want to learn from, is people that are embodied in whatever their full spectrum nature looks like.
Yeah.
So how did you deal with that in this relationship?
I mean, yeah, obviously it didn't work out. But
bye. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it was
blessing.
It was just interesting because I was like, wow, like I've never felt so shamed for this part of me. And I actually kind of looked at, okay, maybe let's just flip it, like put the mirror up. Like, am I internalizing, like shaming parts of my masculine? And I was like, oh, maybe there is some still like remnants of, the cultural programming, like blah, 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 what it means to be the woman and the spiritual, all that shit was just like being deconstructed. But ultimately, like, our dynamic was interesting because it was almost like we would relate, and this is what I find in a lot of couples. So there's the polarity. So it's like my feminine, his masculine, boom, attracted. But when the issue arises is when we go into our contrasexual. So my masculine and his feminine were toxic as fuck at that point. Like, my masculine was an asshole. His feminine was just like out of control, chaotic.
Bitch.
Yeah. Like, so there was just like no harmony. And he also was really resistant to being in his feminine. He had a lot of shame around a man being in his feminine. So he needed to be always masculine and always in the masculine. And I'm like, babe, just surrender, like, just go into your feminine, like it's fine, but he couldn't handle that. So it's like he had to suppress my masculine, so he would stay always in the masculine pole. So he was suppressing his feminine. I was probably suppressing some of my masculine, and that's, I think, where the issue was,
Yeah. So I've had that where I've been in my masculine and I've gone head to head with a partner's masculine, and we're just like full battle of the alphas versus finding a way to like flow together.
Yeah.
Wow, this is so fascinating. I love that. I've never heard anyone talk about that, and it is so fucking true of the contra. And like, how does those aspects of you relate? Is there like healing work or anything people can do if they're listening and they're like, oh my fucking God, that is so me. My, like, let's say they're in a heterosexual pairing and they are more femme and they're feminine with their masculine partner, like that was working. But as you said, then it flips and they're having trouble being in their masculine with their partner's feminine and vice versa.
Yeah, well, this is kind of actually in more like Taoist Tantra, when I've studied a lot of these practices, a lot of it is really based around like the feminine, really to come into wholeness. A woman is to integrate her inner yang, or in psychological terms, Carl Jung talks about the animus, like your inner masculine aspect of your psyche, because that's what's most like strongly in our unconscious as a woman. So in order to become whole, we have to integrate that part of us. And for men, they've got to work with their yin, their anima, their inner feminine. So for the woman, I love doing this work with women and with men as well. I help a lot of men integrate their feminine. I love doing that work. Really, it's for women healing the relationship with the father, their biological father. And then, because that's how we understand masculinity, and it's like usually how we form like our inner man archetype. And so, for example, just say your father was like very controlling and kind of like a dictator. You might see that as like, I never want to be that. I don't like that type of masculinity. So you internalize that and suppress and cast this dictator kind of energy to the side, and then it comes out as a shadow dictator, like this kind of like sideways manipulation, because you're not owning like the fullness of that masculine expression. And then for men, it's a lot of the time maybe they saw their mother was like emotionally uncontrollable. So he like really suppresses that part of him. And then it comes out as this side sniping, like, or really suppressed emotional. And he turns into kind of like a cold psychopath, like it's like we go to the extreme because we don't want to be the traits that we saw as negative in our mother and father. So it's about like actually seeing how we can integrate those qualities in a healthy way, and not suppress like what we saw was bad, in our perception. So inner alchemy with the masculine and feminine is essential. And I love like playing in this dynamic now. Like I'll often feel from my masculine super attracted to a man's feminine. I'm like, wow, like so hot, and then I love when he can flip into his masculine and I'm into my feminine. It's like, I fucking love that.
Yes, I am also a switch, baby girl. Like I am in the BDSM terms, like dom sub, like whether I'm in mask femme, man, woman, like I am definitely feeling you in that. I love it's just I just feel like there's more colors to paint with. And it's like, wow. And I love this conversation so much. I'm so lit up, and like thank you for sharing this wisdom and doing this work in the world. And what I often see in the work I do, and I'm sure you see this as well, is like this, that we can shame, especially because of all that like polarity teaching, like man should always be a man and woman should automatically surrender. Then we're like internalizing that like toxic gender stereotypes wrapped up in spirituality. And then we often shame ourselves. Like you said, you felt really shamed by your partner, or shame our partners. And like, I often will find women that are like, well, he's not in his masculine, so like I can't be in my feminine. And I will often say to them, what do you actually mean when you say he's not in his masculine? Which trait is it that you're yearning for? Like remove the word masculine. Are you wanting more vulnerability for him? Are you wanting more heart-centeredness? What is it you actually need? Because when you say to your partner, you're not being feminine enough, or you're being too masculine or too feminine or too what the fuck ever, all they feel is I'm not enough.
Yeah.
And you're not actually giving them any keys to win. There's no directive. There's no like invitation. There's nowhere to go from there. So I just love this idea of like removing the shame and just like let us play as the like essential beings that we are beyond polarity and gender. And like, we incarnated in this body, and also like, let's play with those colors without getting so fucking overly identified with them.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, I speak to a lot of my clients are kind of more from the mainstream world, and it's just like this languaging doesn't even exist, and there's just natural, I don't know, like it just seems to kind of flow in, like I think when you bring so much headiness to like you're not masculine enough, you're not feminine enough, it just like it just is a head fuck. It's like just be in your natural expression, and there's going to be someone that will complement you and bring out the best in you. It's like if you're actually more of a feminine man, like if you're an artist, for example, and you're very in touch with your feminine, you probably attract more women who are like business oriented or masculine dominant, and that's okay because that complements you. It's not like this cookie cutter template for every human.
My God, bless it. Wow, I could speak forever to you. I'm so grateful. We're coming to the end of our time together. And I'm just like so lit up, and I'm sure people listening are as well. And so if they want to find you and connect with this beautiful work that you're doing in the world, how can they find you? Yeah,
so you can head to my Instagram. It's Tantric Alchemy Official. And my website is tantricalchemy.net. And I just wrote a book, so that just came out oh
my God, congrats.
Yeah, it came out in February. It's called Sex Priestess. And it's really like a journey of, moving from sexual trauma to sexual liberation and unlocking your gifts. And it's for both men and women, to be honest. So many men are reading it and understanding more about the feminine. So, it's open to all.
Where can we buy it?
On Amazon. Yeah.
On Amazon.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Sex Priestess. Get it now. I love the title.
Thanks.
So much. Well, my love, thank you so much for the work you do in the world and the energy that you brought to this conversation. And I'm so excited for everyone listening to go over to Tantric Alchemy Official on Instagram and connect with your work there.
Thank you.
That's it for today, Awakened One. And just a quick thank you from me. Thank you for gifting us with your most precious resource, your time and attention, so that we can make this world a more awakened place. And if we're not friends on Instagram yet, then we absolutely should be. So come on over and say hello at Angelika Alana, and I'll see you there and see you next week.